Under a snowy tree in the park, a millionaire CEO sat alone, distant, untouchable. Then a small hand tugged his coat. "I don't have a daddy. Can I spend a day with you like a daughter?" He didn't know her name, but in that moment something cracked open in him. What followed wasn't just one shared day, it was the beginning of a healing neither of them expected. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're watching from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. The snow was falling in soft, lazy flakes across the park, coating the benches, the lampposts, and the bare branches in a gentle hush. A brass quartet played faintly near the charity tent, their instruments gleaming gold under strands of twinkling lights. Children laughed as they tugged sleds behind them or chased one another in thick scarves and puffy coats. The world sparkled with warmth and movement, except where Ethan Cole sat alone beneath a lit pine tree, still as stone. He wore a tailored navy coat, his gloved hands tucked into the pockets, boots polished and untouched by the slush. His dark hair was combed back, not a strand out of place. People knew who he was, the Ethan Cole, CEO of one of Portland's most powerful tech firms. He was the man on the stage last month, cutting a ribbon at a hospital his company funded. But no one approached him here. Even the charity organizers, milling nearby with donation boxes and holiday smiles, kept a subtle distance. Ethan's stare was blank, his jaw tight, as if he were physically present, but emotionally watching everything from a glass wall. He hadn't meant to stay this long. These appearances were for optics. Come, smile for 15 minutes, make a sizable donation, leave. But tonight, he found himself rooted to the spot, unable to explain the heaviness in his chest or the way the carols scraped at something raw in him. That was when he heard the voice. "Excuse me, mister." Ethan blinked and looked down, instinctively expecting a reporter or volunteer. But standing in front of him was a little girl, maybe 4 years old, bundled in a faded red coat 2 sizes too big, the hem dragging across her boots. Blonde curls peeked out from beneath a worn knit hat. In one mittened hand, she clutched a tattered teddy bear with only one eye. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her lips slightly chapped. But it was her eyes wide, brown, and steady that stopped Ethan cold. "I don't have a daddy," she said, her voice trembling only slightly. Can I spend a day with you? Like a daughter?" Ethan froze. For a second, he genuinely wasn't sure he had heard her right. She looked up at him, not begging, not crying, just waiting, as if this were a perfectly reasonable question to ask a stranger in the snow. Her bear dangled at her side. A flake landed on her lashes and stayed there untouched. His heart stuttered in a way it hadn't in years. A few yards away, a woman stood watching. Her coat was thin, her eyes weary. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, and though exhaustion hung on her shoulders, there was something steel-strong in her posture, protective. Watching the little girl, but not intervening, waiting. Their eyes met. The woman gave a nod, not asking permission, but trusting Ethan not to break something fragile. He turned back to the girl. His voice, sharpened by years of boardrooms and precise negotiation, felt foreign in his own throat. "What's your name?" "Lila," she said, almost like a secret. He crouched, lowering himself to her eye level, unsure why his hands were trembling inside his gloves. "I just want to know," she began, her eyes flicking to his coat pocket, "what it feels like to hold a daddy's hand. Just once." Her voice cracked on the last word. The snow seemed to quiet all at once. Ethan's gaze dropped to her tiny mittened hand. She held it out slightly, not demanding, not insistent, just open. He couldn't remember the last time someone reached for him without wanting something in return. Behind her, the woman stepped forward slowly. "Lila, sweetheart," she called gently. But Lila didn't move. Ethan's breath fogged the space between them. His hand twitched at his side, almost of its own accord. It hovered there for a beat, then slowly, carefully, began to rise. And then it stopped, just inches from hers, trembling visibly. His heart thudded in his chest, unfamiliar and loud, because in that moment, something cracked inside him. Not a loud break, a hairline fracture, a memory, a feeling. He didn't know this little girl, didn't know her mother. But as Lila looked up at him with a kind of brave hope only children dared carry, he realized that somewhere buried beneath a decade of silence, polished surfaces, and perfectly written press releases, he missed being touched by something real. She didn't blink. Neither did he. And then, just as his fingers reached hers, the music in the park swelled, but Ethan barely heard it. He was too busy remembering what it felt like to be human. Ethan stood alone in his penthouse, the city stretching out beneath him in a sea of glass and cold winter fog. Portland glittered below, but it might as well have been a painting distant, untouched, and behind a pane of silence. The floor-to-ceiling windows, the sharp angles of the granite kitchen, the dimmed track lighting, all of it was pristine, calculated, and utterly lifeless. The space echoed with a silence so deep that even his own breathing sounded intrusive. No photos, no throw blankets, no smudged fingerprints, nothing that suggested a life had ever been lived here. He pulled off his gloves slowly, one finger at a time, and set them neatly on the entry table next to his keys. The same table that had held nothing but his schedule and a charity gala invitation all year. As he crossed the room, his footsteps softened against the imported wood floors. His coat still hung from his shoulders, but he didn't take it off. He just stood in the middle of the room like someone who didn't quite belong in their own home. In the distance, a wind gust rattled faintly against the window panes. Outside, snow continued to fall, but inside the air was still, hollow. He opened his laptop but didn't touch it. A news site blinked on the screen photos from the Christmas Eve charity event. His own face stared back at him in one of the pictures, standing awkwardly beneath the string lights. And just to the side, almost out of frame, a child in a red coat holding a teddy bear, her face tilted upward toward him, like a question the camera had failed to capture. He stared at it for a long time, jaw tight, throat dry. Then, without even realizing it, he shut the screen and walked to the far end of the penthouse past the formal dining area he hadn't used in years, past the bar cart collecting dust, and into the walk-in closet that held more suits than most men would wear in a decade. He opened a discreet black drawer near the back. Inside was a small envelope worn at the edges, tucked beneath a tie he hadn't worn since 2012. He sat down on the leather bench, the envelope in hand. Carefully, like it might break apart, he slid out a faded ultrasound photo. A tiny blur, barely a shape, but he knew what it had meant, who it had meant. His fingers lingered over the corner of the image where a small 12 weeks was printed in gray. His ex-fiancée had cried when the doctor showed it to them. He hadn't said much, just nodded, wrapped her hand in his, and smiled the way you smile when your world begins to change in the best possible way. Except it hadn't lasted. At 16 weeks, they were in the emergency room. Cold hands, quiet voices, A doctor with soft eyes? He remembered staring at the ceiling tiles, counting them while she sobbed. He remembered the pressure of grief in his chest. Not dramatic, just a slow, suffocating weight that never really left. And he remembered when she left too, when she said she couldn't look at him without remembering the loss, that it hurt too much to try again. He had agreed. He built walls after that, not literal ones. Ethan was no stranger to luxury, but emotional ones. Walls made of quarterly earnings reports, of shareholder meetings, of 14-hour workdays, and perfectly optimized calendars. People didn't leave if you never let them in. But now, that little girl's voice was echoing in those same empty spaces. "Can I spend a day with you? Like a daughter?" He rubbed the bridge of his nose, trying to will the memory away, but it wouldn't go. A soft knock at the penthouse door broke the silence. It opened slightly before he could answer. "Sorry, Jenna's voice came from the hallway, quiet, uncertain. She stepped in with a file folder in one hand and a scarf still wrapped around her neck. "You didn't respond to the meeting update, so I thought maybe..." Ethan looked up, startled. "It's nearly 10. You're still here?" Jenna hesitated. "I figured you'd forget the calendar changes with the holiday shuffle." He didn't answer. He was still holding the ultrasound photo, half hidden in his palm. Her gaze softened. She took a step closer, then paused. "You okay, boss?" He forced a short nod. "Fine." She didn't believe it. She had worked for him for nearly 7 years. She had seen him crush deals, fire executives, turn around failing departments in weeks. But tonight, she saw something else, something cracked at the edges. Jenna glanced at the coffee table, at the charity event photos still open on his laptop, and then at the envelope in his hands. "You've been quieter since the park," she said softly. He looked away, unsure how to respond. Jenna didn't press. She just nodded slowly, the kind of nod that said she understood more than he wanted to admit. "Good night, Mr. Cole," she murmured, then turned to leave. He waited until the door clicked shut behind her, and the silence returned. Ethan stood and walked back to the window. He held the ultrasound up against the city lights, the snow beyond the glass swirling like something alive. And then, barely above a whisper, he said it to no one. "I never even got to hold her." His own voice startled him. He hadn't spoken that sentence aloud in over a decade, but as the words left his mouth, he thought of Lila's tiny mittened hand reaching out. Not begging, just hoping. And he heard her voice again. "I just want to know what it feels like to hold a daddy's hand." He closed his eyes. The ache in his chest was unfamiliar, and somehow, exactly what he had needed to feel. The sun peeked cautiously through thick, low clouds as Ethan's SUV turned onto a street he wouldn't have ventured down in years, if ever. It wasn't far from the glossy skyline where he lived and worked, yet this neighborhood on Portland's east side felt like another world entirely. The streets were lined with slush, the curbs uneven, and the houses old but dignified in their own worn-down way. Cracked fences leaned tiredly, Christmas lights hung lopsided, and children's toys peeked out from snow-covered lawns. The black SUV stuck out like a sore thumb. Ethan kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other tightening slightly as he scanned the addresses. Number 3127. There it was, a weathered duplex with peeling green paint and a dented mailbox barely hanging onto its post. A faded welcome mat sat askew, and from the front window, a child's paper snowflake was taped onto the glass, slightly crooked. His eyes lingered on it longer than he meant to. He parked and turned off the engine, the silence in the car almost suffocating. For a moment, he considered backing out. What was he doing here? He wasn't someone who made house calls. He wasn't someone who showed up. But Lila's voice from that night still echoed in his ears. If I call you Daddy, will you leave like the others? He stepped out. The air was sharp and carried the smell of wood smoke and damp pavement. He adjusted his coat, brushed the snow from his sleeves, and walked up the creaking porch steps. Before he could knock, the door opened a crack. A woman's voice called through, tight and cautious. Can I help you? The door opened wider. Rachel Meyer stood there, hair tied in a messy bun, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and a smudge of flour on her cheek. She wore a sweater that had seen better years, and eyes that had seen even more. Her expression was wary but not rude, just the look of someone who'd had to be careful for a long time. Ethan cleared his throat. Hi, I came to see if Lila's home. And you, if you're willing. She folded her arms. Why? He hesitated. She spoke to me the other night, at the park. I know, Rachel said, not unkindly. I saw. She opened the door enough to let him in. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't either, he replied honestly. Inside, the home was small and tidy, filled with the scent of something warm, possibly cinnamon and laundry detergent. The couch sagged slightly in the middle. A thin curtain covered the kitchen doorway. Lila's drawings decorated the fridge crayon rainbows, uneven hearts, a smiling stick figure family with a question mark above one of the heads. On the wall above the couch was a taped paper crown labeled in childish handwriting, My Dream Family. Ethan's gaze landed on it. Something in his chest shifted. She makes those, Rachel said, following his eyes, whenever she gets lonely. Do you get a lot of visitors? He asked. Rachel gave a short breath of a laugh. Not bitter, just tired. Not really, just neighbors mostly, and Edna downstairs. But she's 92 and only comes up for tea and cookies. Lila's voice broke through from the back room. Mommy, is that Daddy from the park? Ethan's breath hitched. Rachel looked briefly startled, then called back. Sweetie, his name's Mr. Ethan. You remember? We talked about him visiting. Tiny footsteps scrambled on old wood floors. In a flash of red and blonde, Lila burst into the room, teddy bear in hand, and launched herself toward Ethan without hesitation. He caught her instinctively, his arms going stiff before softening. She smelled like apples and cinnamon and crayons. Somehow it made sense. You came? She grinned, eyes shining. I drew you. Want to see? Before he could answer, she had already taken his hand and dragged him toward a tiny table near the window, cluttered with paper, dull crayons, and an empty juice cup. She handed him a picture with a flourish. It was them three stick figures. One tall with a square head labeled Ethan, one shorter with brown hair labeled Mom, and in between, a smiling little girl holding both their hands. Me. Ethan's throat closed. He blinked hard. It's beautiful, Lila. Rachel watched from the kitchen, her expression unreadable. They spent the next 20 minutes coloring while Rachel tidied quietly, observing. Ethan, for his part, felt as though he were walking across a frozen lake, every movement unfamiliar, every word carefully chosen. Yet Lila made it easy. She told stories about her Teddy, her dreams of visiting a flower castle, and how she thought snowflakes had secret wishes in them. Eventually, Rachel offered him tea. They sat at the kitchen table while Lila played with plastic animals on the floor. I don't usually let strangers in, she said after a long silence. I don't usually visit, Ethan replied, sipping awkwardly. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. So why did you? He paused. Because she asked something no one ever dared to ask me. Rachel's expression softened. I thought about walking away, Ethan admitted. God knows it would have been easier, but then she said something. That if she called me daddy, would I leave too? Rachel set her cup down, slowly. I've been left before too, she said. Not just by men, by family, by life. It makes you build fences, sometimes whole fortresses. Their eyes met. A quiet understanding passed between them. That evening, as the sky turned deep gray and the air outside thickened with the promise of snow, Ethan stood to go. Lila followed him to the door, dragging her teddy along the floor. Will you come again? She asked. I'll try, he said, hesitating. She reached up and tugged at his coat. Can I ask one thing? He knelt. If I call you Daddy, will you leave like the others? His breath caught. She wasn't crying, she didn't beg, but her voice held the kind of ache only a child too young to name grief could carry. And in that moment, Ethan knew this wasn't a visit anymore. This was a beginning. Saturday morning brought with it a biting chill, the kind that made breath hang visibly in the air and car windows freeze from the inside. But Ethan didn't seem to notice. He stood in front of a small storefront on Hawthorne Avenue, watching from across the street as Rachel wrestled with the broken wheel of her flower cart, her gloved hands smudged with rust and frustration. Lila sat on the curb nearby, bundled in her red coat again, drawing hearts in the snow with a stick, her teddy bear tucked beneath her arm like it was supervising. Ethan had been watching for 5 minutes already, standing behind the tinted window of his parked car. His assistant had sent the day's agenda to his phone, twice meetings, calls, a lunch with investors, but none of it held weight. Not today. Not after he had promised Lila, and maybe Rachel too, that he'd be back. He crossed the street, his leather boots crunching softly on the salted sidewalk. Looks like that cart's giving you trouble again, he said, crouching beside it. Rachel glanced up, startled. Ethan? What are you? He offered a small smile. I was in the neighborhood. She raised a brow. Right. Just happened to be walking past a busted flower cart on the east side. He didn't argue. Instead, he tugged off his gloves and ran his fingers beneath the metal frame. You know this axle's cracked in 2 places. I know, she muttered. I just don't have $200 to replace it. Good thing I'm not charging, he replied. She blinked at him. You know how to fix carts? I know how to fix things, he said simply, then added, especially when they matter. Rachel didn't say anything for a moment. She stepped back, folding her arms against the cold, watching as Ethan pulled out a small toolkit from the trunk of his SUV, one he apparently kept in pristine condition, and got to work. 20 minutes later, the cart was upright again, sturdier than it had been in years. Lila clapped. Yay! Mr. Ethan, you fixed it! Ethan turned and grinned at her, brushing metal dust from his fingers. Can't have your flowers falling over in the street, can we? The little girl skipped over, slipped her hand into his, and looked up with shining eyes. Mommy says you're like a real-life helper elf. Ethan chuckled. An elf in a navy coat? That's a new one. Just then, from behind his back, he pulled a paper bag. Also, I brought something. He knelt and unwrapped a pair of small, fur-lined boots, cherry red with white soles, just her size. Lila gasped. Are these for me? He nodded. I figured your toes deserve a little more warmth this winter. Rachel stepped forward quickly. "Ethan, that's no strings," he said gently, meeting her eyes. "Just boots. A thank you for the picture she gave me." Lila was already tugging her old shoes off and slipping into the new ones. "They feel like clouds." As she twirled in them, Rachel's voice softened. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." Later that afternoon, he surprised them both again. The three of them met near the park. Ethan carried a small bouquet of daffodils, simple, bright, and wrapped in brown paper. He handed them to Rachel. Her brow furrowed. "These are mine. This was my arrangement, from years ago. I asked around," he said. "A vendor remembered your work." Rachel stared at the flowers for a long time. Her fingers trembled as she held them. "I haven't seen this design in almost 6 years." "Look too good to stay forgotten," Ethan replied. She said nothing, but her eyes glossed over, and for the first time since they'd met, her smile wasn't guarded. It was soft, real, like something cracking open inside her. That evening, they returned to the apartment. Rachel made soup. Lila insisted Ethan stay for dinner. He didn't argue. As night fell and the apartment grew quiet, Lila rubbed her eyes and yawned. Rachel began gathering blankets for bedtime. "I can tuck her in if you like," Ethan offered hesitantly. Rachel looked surprised, then slowly nodded. In the small bedroom, filled with drawings and doll clothes and tiny dreams, Ethan knelt beside Lila's bed. She was already curled under the quilt, her teddy tucked beside her. Her new boots sat by the wall like trophies. He brushed a stray curl from her forehead. "Do you think Mommy will smile again? If I have a daddy?" she asked softly. Ethan froze. His breath caught. He wasn't sure how to respond. He looked at her, this small, hopeful child, who had no idea how many layers she had peeled back from a man who hadn't let anyone touch his soul in years. He forced a smile and whispered, "She's already smiling, Lila." The little girl smiled back and closed her eyes. Within moments, her breathing slowed, peaceful. Ethan stood there for a long while, watching, listening. Then he returned to the living room, grabbed his coat, and stepped into the night. The air bit at his skin, but he barely felt it. In his pocket, he reached for something, a tiny locket Lila had given him at dinner, folded from paper and tied with yarn. Inside was a crayon drawing of the three of them holding hands. On the back, she had scribbled one sentence, "My real dad has a warm hand." And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Cole sat alone in his car and cried. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt strangely natural, like music. You didn't know the lyrics to, but still somehow understood. Ethan began stopping by unannounced, always with something in hand. A box of groceries, a potted herb Rachel had once mentioned loving, coloring pencils for Lila wrapped in plain brown paper. He never stayed long at first, just long enough to help fix a door hinge, change a flickering light bulb, or walk Lila home from preschool when Rachel was working double shifts. At first, Rachel was cautious, watching him with the wariness of someone who'd carried too much alone for too long. But over time, her eyes softened. Not because of grand gestures, but because of the little ones. The way Ethan sat on the floor with Lila and helped her build an entire zoo out of cereal boxes. Or how he always asked Rachel if she'd eaten and waited for a real answer. One morning, Rachel opened the front door to find a small music box on the doormat. It was wooden, hand-carved with a tiny rose etched into the lid. When she turned the key, a soft lullaby played, the same one she hummed to Lila at bedtime. Inside, a note in Ethan's handwriting read, "For the quiet moments." Rachel didn't say anything about it. She didn't have to. Ethan had changed his schedule to work remotely 2 days a week. Jenna, ever perceptive, didn't question it. She simply adjusted his calendar and smiled when he brought back stories about sidewalk snowball fights and Lila's preschool art show. The man who used to count meetings in 5-minute blocks now sat cross-legged on the living room rug for hours, letting Lila braid his hair with glittery clips while he answered emails with one hand. Lila had taken to calling him E. At first, it was just easier to say, but as the days passed, it became something between a name and a claim. She would shout it with pride when he arrived. "E is here!" She'd run to him, arms wide. And Ethan, he started kneeling every time to catch her. One rainy afternoon, the three of them sat around the small kitchen table. Rachel sipped tea while Lila colored furiously, tongue poking out in concentration. She was working on a masterpiece, she said, and neither adult was allowed to peek. Ethan watched quietly, chin resting in his palm, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Rachel looked up and caught him staring, not at her, not at the room, but at the moment itself, like he wanted to memorize it. "You're quiet today," she said, teasing gently. "I like the quiet," he replied. "I didn't realize how much I missed it." She tilted her head. "Did you ever have it?" He thought for a long beat. "Not like this." Later that evening, Rachel walked into the living room and saw Ethan alone, sitting on the couch, holding the music box in his hands. It wasn't playing, just resting in his palms, turning slowly between his fingers. His eyes were glassy, distant. He didn't notice her at first. "Ethan?" she asked softly. He blinked and looked up, startled out of whatever thought had claimed him. "Sorry," he murmured, setting it down. "Just thinking." She didn't push. She only sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "You don't have to tell me," she said after a moment, "but I'm here, if you ever want to." Ethan looked at her, really looked, and something behind his usual guarded stare shifted. "I was supposed to be a father once," he said. His voice was low, not breaking, but holding back a tide. Rachel didn't gasp or ask questions. She simply nodded. "It didn't happen, and after that, I didn't try again. I buried it, buried everything." Silence filled the room like snow falling outside, soft, heavy, full of things unsaid. Rachel reached over and gently placed her hand over his. She didn't speak, but she didn't have to. In that simple touch was every word he needed to hear. The next day, Ethan arrived at the preschool to find Lila sitting at a miniature table, proudly holding up a crayon drawing. "This one's for you," she said, beaming. It was a picture of 3 figures, Rachel with a crown of flowers, Lila with her teddy, and Ethan in a blue suit, holding both their hands. Above them, in bright letters, it said, "Our family." He knelt down, fighting the burn behind his eyes, and accepted the picture like it was the most valuable document he'd ever been given. That night, as he prepared to leave their apartment, Lila ran up and hugged him fiercely. "I love you, E," she whispered into his coat. Ethan closed his eyes. "I love you too, Bug." Rachel stood at the doorway watching them. She didn't interrupt. But when Ethan turned to leave, she stepped forward and gently slipped the drawing into his coat pocket. "Keep it close," she said, voice barely above a whisper. And he did. Later, back in his penthouse, still glass, still cold, still too large. Ethan opened his wallet and carefully folded the drawing inside, right next to the ultrasound photo. For the first time in over a decade, There were two pieces of life in that space. Two reasons to hope. The quiet rhythm they had built together came to a shattering halt one Thursday afternoon when the doorbell rang and Rachel opened it to find Tom standing on her porch. He hadn't changed much. Same smug smirk, same leather jacket worn like a uniform, same eyes that looked past people rather than at them. But this time, there was something colder beneath the surface. He leaned against the doorway like he owned the place, one hand tucked in his jeans, the other holding a manila envelope. "Hey, Rachel," he said casually, as if 3 years of silence could be erased with a smirk. "Long time." Rachel stepped back instinctively. "What are you doing here? I heard through someone at the diner that you've got a new man playing house. Thought I'd stop by, see my daughter." "She's not your daughter," Rachel said flatly. Tom chuckled. "I signed the birth certificate, didn't I?" Rachel's voice dropped. "You left before she could walk." He shrugged, unbothered. "Doesn't mean I stopped having rights." That evening, Ethan walked into the apartment and immediately felt the shift. The air was heavy, like the aftermath of a storm. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, the envelope from Tom opened in front of her legal papers. Custody threats, mediation demands, his name scrawled with aggressive strokes. "I didn't think he'd come back," she said quietly. "Not after all this time." Ethan sat down across from her, reading the documents. "Do you want me to call someone? I have attorneys?" "No." Her voice was sharper than usual. She softened. "I mean, thank you, but this is mine to fight. I can't let him near her again." Ethan leaned back, troubled. "What does he want?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with exhaustion and something else, fear. Control, not love, never love. They didn't talk much after that. Lila had gone to bed early, sensing the tension. The apartment, once filled with gentle music and soft laughter, sat in uneasy silence. For the first time in weeks, Ethan stayed only 15 minutes before heading out. But he didn't go far. He drove around the block 5 times, sat in his car with the heater off, stared at the legal documents she had copied for him. His mind raced with questions and what-ifs and instincts he didn't understand. He had stepped into something deeper than he planned, and now he was afraid. Afraid he'd bring more harm than good. Afraid he wasn't enough to protect them. That night, he didn't sleep. By morning, the snow had returned in thick, white swirls. Rachel woke to the sound of coughing, not the usual scratchy throat from cold air, but something deeper, ragged, wet. Lila was burning up. Rachel panicked. Her thermometer blinked red. Lila whimpered, her cheeks flushed, eyes glassy. She dialed the clinic, but the line rang endlessly. She tried to get Lila dressed, but the girl's limbs went limp in her arms. That's when the door flew open. Ethan stood there, snow in his hair, worry etched across his face. "I had a feeling," he said. "I couldn't sleep." Rachel didn't argue. She just looked at him, desperate. "She's burning up. She's not talking." He moved fast, wrapped Lila in blankets, carried her carefully, whispering to keep her awake. They bundled into his SUV, speeding through icy streets, hazard lights flashing as the snow thickened. The urgent care center was nearly empty. A nurse saw the flushed child in Ethan's arms and ushered them in. Machines beeped, vitals checked, oxygen administered. Rachel sat curled in the chair, her hands trembling. Ethan stood at Lila's side, holding her small hand in both of his. His voice was low, steady. "I'm here, kiddo. We've got you." Hours passed like years. Finally, a doctor came in and said the fever was stabilizing, but she'd need to stay for observation. Ethan exhaled deeply. His body slumped for the first time all day. Rachel stood and walked over. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders and pulled her in. She didn't resist. Later, when the nurses changed shifts and the lights dimmed for the night, Ethan stayed beside Lila's bed while Rachel rested on a fold-out chair. The little girl stirred in her sleep, her breathing shallow but calm, and then soft, so soft it might have been a dream. Lila whispered, "Daddy came back." Ethan's breath caught. He looked down. Her fingers curled around his thumb. Even in her fevered haze, she held on. "I'm here, sweetheart," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Rachel stirred, blinking awake. She watched the two of them, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. Ethan turned toward her, voice rough with emotion. "She called me Daddy." Rachel nodded, her eyes shimmering. "Because that's who you are." Outside the window, snow fell heavier than it had in days. But inside that hospital room, something shifted permanently. Not through declarations or legal documents, but through presence, through the sheer will to stay. It had been 4 days since Lila's fever broke. The hospital room that once felt like a battleground now felt like a fragile sanctuary, quiet, warm, and filled with the gentle rhythm of machines and soft conversations. Rachel sat curled in a chair near the window, her eyes fixed on the skyline bathed in morning gray. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her heart ached even more with fear, relief, and something else she hadn't dared name. Ethan sat beside Lila's bed, flipping through a picture book she had dropped earlier. Lila was sleeping again, her color returning slowly, her breath now steady. Every so often, she would murmur in her sleep, clutching the bear tucked beneath her chin. Ethan hadn't left her side for more than a few hours since they arrived. He brought cocoa, told stories, helped Rachel brush out Lila's tangles with patience that surprised even her. Now, in the glow of early light, Rachel finally spoke. Her voice was rough from lack of rest, but there was no hesitation in her words. "I don't want her to lose you." Ethan didn't look up at first. He kept his eyes on the page, tracing the outline of a painted tree. "You're not going to lose me," he said. "No," she whispered, standing slowly, moving closer. "Not me. Her." At that, he looked up. "I've watched men come and go," she said. "Say sweet things, promise weekends and birthdays, and then disappear. But you didn't run, not even when you could have." Ethan stood now too, meeting her gaze. "Rachel, I didn't just show up because she needed someone," he said. "I stayed because I did too." For a moment, the room was quiet but charged with everything they hadn't said. Then Rachel reached into her tote bag and pulled out a small folder. "There's a lawyer who specializes in protective arrangements. I asked him about guardianship options, in case something ever happens to me." Ethan took the folder slowly, eyes widening slightly. "I'm not going anywhere," he repeated, firmer now. "But if there's anything I can do to protect her, legally or otherwise, I will. I've already spoken to my attorney. He's drawing up backup custody papers. I didn't want to pressure you with it, but I meant it when I said I'm all in." Rachel's shoulders relaxed, not from relief, but recognition. She'd been waiting for someone to show up with actions, not words. Later that week, once Lila was discharged, Ethan surprised both mother and daughter with a visit to a rundown flower shop on the corner of Belmont Street. Its windows were boarded up, the sign faded and cracked. "What is this?" Rachel asked, stepping out of the car, confused. Ethan walked beside her, his coat flapping lightly in the wind. A second chance. He pulled a key from his coat pocket and opened the creaky front door. The space inside was dusty and cold, but sunlight filtered through the upper windows in a golden wash. There was a wooden counter, scattered shelves, even an old tin cash register that still worked when tapped twice. Rachel stood motionless. This place, it used to be my dream. I know, Ethan said. Jenna found the old articles. You were profiled once in a local magazine. Said you wanted to create a space where flowers weren't just pretty. They meant something. Tears welled in Rachel's eyes. I thought, Ethan continued, we could do it together. Bring this place back to life. You as the creative director, me as the silent partner. Rachel looked at him, stunned. You're serious? He nodded. We'll call it the Bloom Room, and not just flowers. A little corner for books, maybe free workshops for single parents, art days for kids. We can make it more than just a shop. We make it a haven. That afternoon, they got to work. Lila skipped through the empty space, her sneakers echoing against the floorboards. She pointed to where the teddy bear wall should go, then drew stars on the foggy windows with her fingertip. Ethan rolled up his sleeves. Rachel brought out sketches from a notebook she hadn't opened in years. They laughed when the ancient heater kicked on with a groan. They sang along to a radio they found in the back room. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Rachel allowed herself to dream again. One evening, a few weeks later, they sat on the shop floor, backs against the wall, the room still smelling faintly of sawdust and fresh paint. Lila had fallen asleep in her sleeping bag nearby, her hair haloed by fairy lights Ethan had strung across the ceiling. Rachel looked over at him, the light catching in her eyes. You've given her more than just stability, Ethan. You've given her joy. He turned to face her fully. You've given me something too, Rachel. They sat in that stillness for a long moment, and then he asked quietly, would it be okay if I stayed forever? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes filled, and her fingers reached for his hand, intertwining gently. Then a voice broke the moment. Only if you read bedtime stories too, Lila shouted sleepily, not even opening her eyes. Rachel and Ethan both laughed soft, full, and completely unguarded. And in that laughter, a future began to form, not perfect, not without its shadows, but whole. Snow fell like feathers from a quiet sky, coating the treetops and rooftops of the little hillside cottage that now belonged to three. Just outside of Portland, tucked beneath towering evergreens and surrounded by silence that felt sacred rather than lonely, the cottage glowed with life. Through its frosted windows, soft amber light poured into the night, casting golden shadows across the fresh white ground. Inside, the air was filled with the scent of cinnamon, pine, and something warm rising in the oven. Lila sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, her cheeks dusted with flour and her curls tangled with silver tinsel. She was humming a Christmas song as she colored on a large sheet of paper, crayons scattered like confetti around her. The fireplace crackled gently in the background, and fairy lights twinkled along the banisters like stars strung in rows. Ethan stood in the kitchen, rolling dough with both hands, his sleeves pushed to his elbows. His movements were slow and easy, his expression calm. He still wore a watch on his wrist, but he hadn't checked it once all day. Rachel moved beside him, her hair tied in a messy bun, her flannel sleeves rolled, matching his rhythm as if they'd done this their whole lives. They moved in sync, passing, folding, laughing at the shapes Lila tried to cut with her cookie molds. It was Christmas Eve again, exactly 1 year since a little girl in a red coat had walked up to a man under a tree and asked if she could spend a day with him like a daughter. That one day had become a lifetime. The Bloom Room had opened its doors 3 months earlier and quickly became a place the community embraced. A flower shop, yes, but also a haven. Single mothers gathered there for free classes in the evenings. Kids came to draw and plant seeds on Saturdays. The smell of fresh blooms and warm cocoa lingered in every corner. And in the middle of it all stood Rachel and Ethan, business partners. Yes, but far more than that now. They had grown into a kind of family that didn't need to be defined by names or legal papers. Love had done the heavy lifting. Lila jumped up suddenly, her crayon clutched in one fist. "I finished it!" She ran to Ethan, holding out her latest masterpiece. It was a drawing of their cottage, snow falling gently over the roof, stars above it. Inside were 3 stick figures standing in a triangle. One tall, one medium, one small, all holding hands. She had written in bold purple letters across the top, "Our home. Forever." Ethan crouched and took the drawing in his hands, his throat tightening. Rachel leaned over his shoulder to look. "You even gave us matching sweaters," she teased, pointing to the stick figures. Lila beamed. "Because we match now." They didn't speak for a moment. The weight of the simplicity struck them. How something drawn in crayon could say more than 1,000 words. After dinner, they gathered around the tree. Lila opened a single present, a handmade book tied with red yarn. Inside were pages of their story, printed photos, hand-sketched memories, and notes written in Lila's sprawling handwriting. The first page read, "Once upon a snowy day, I asked for a daddy." She turned to Ethan. "Keep reading." He smiled and continued, his voice soft but steady. "And I got forever." Rachel wrapped her arms around Lila and kissed her forehead, and Ethan closed the book slowly, as if trying to seal that moment into time. Later, they bundled up in scarves and coats and made their way to the park, the same one where it all began. The town square was once again lit with golden lights. Children ran past with candy canes and parents pulled sleds along the paths. Familiar music floated through the air. Lila walked between them, holding both their hands, her red coat slightly brighter this year, her steps more confident. They passed the bench where Ethan had once sat alone, where everything had changed. Lila stopped. "Can we sit here?" she asked. They did, all 3 of them, just for a moment. She looked up at them, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think," she whispered, "that snow remembers everything?" Ethan chuckled. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she fidgeted with her scarf, "like maybe when snow falls again in the same place, it remembers who stood here last time." Rachel smiled. "Maybe it does." Lila leaned into Ethan's side. "I asked for a daddy that day," she said softly. He looked down at her, gently brushing her curls back. "I know." "And I got forever," she added just above a whisper. Rachel took her other hand, and together the 3 of them sat beneath the lights, the world glowing around them. Snow began to fall again, light at first, then heavier. It caught in their hair, on their eyelashes, on the sleeves of Ethan's coat. But none of them moved, because they were already home. And as they stood up, walking hand in hand through the snow-covered path toward the life they had built, the lights behind them shimmered. The park, the cottage, the shop, they were no longer places. They were pieces of a story that had rewritten itself with one small voice and one bold question. And in that story, every chapter ended the same way. They stayed. What an incredible journey of forgiveness, love, and second chances. Ethan, Rachel, and Lila's story truly reminds us that sometimes the greatest transformations happen when we open our hearts to the unexpected. If this heartfelt story touched you, please give it a thumbs up to show your support and share it with anyone who might need a little hope or inspiration today. Now, we'd love to hear from you. This holiday season or any time of year, what small act of kindness have you witnessed or been a part of that brought a family closer or created a new, meaningful bond? Share your story with us in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next uplifting story.